Good day, everyone. Yeah, I'm really sorry about what's happened to all of our lives. But really, the only key to your success right now is to continue on through your college classes and get that degree that you've worked so hard to work for. That's what's going to propel you into the future. That's what's going to give you the competitive edge here as the new economy that emerges after the pandemic is going to have a giant hole in it. It's going to need to be stepped into by people who are learned people who have a liberal arts education and hopefully people who are really excellent communicators such as yourself. And is there a time period where the voice matters more than now? The people in your household that you're speaking to, are they giving you comfort? Are they bringing you anxiety? Are they lending a helping hand? Are they understanding? Are they just trying to cope with their own problems because of the pandemic? All of this shows up in the voice. In the middle of all this, we have the media being criticized for many different things. But what would we be doing right now without the media? What would you be doing without your favorite television shows, your favorite songs, your favorite websites? What would you be doing right now? How would you learn about the coronavirus? How would you communicate with others and stay in touch? How would you check in on people who you're not able to visit to find out if they're okay? How would you be able to express yourself? Something that innately as human beings we need to do. It's all done through the media, and central to this experience is the voice. So this course arguably has never been more important than it is right now. And with that backdrop, this is how we're going to proceed. Understanding, of course, that times are different, and my expectations for what you do in this class are going to have to be modified because of what you're dealing with. But be assured, I have every confidence in my students having the ability to pull together the resources to put together acceptable projects for this class. I've already seen that from many of you throughout my time at WESS and across all of my classes. You all have the capability at your fingertips. So please don't get too caught up in how are you going to get this done. Instead, try getting it done and see how it turns out. Now, one of the most important pieces of media content to help a society deal with circumstances such as the pandemic is a documentary. A documentary is a very important piece of media content because it tells what life is like. And the defining feature of a documentary is it tells what life is like from the viewpoint of the people that life is like for. In other words, the people who are the subjects of the documentary. A documentary is not told mainly by a third person, a person who's observing others. Yes, you have some of that in a documentary. But unlike a newscast where you have a person narrating what's happening in the rest of the world, the documentary often tells, in the words of human beings, what is happening to them under the subject of the documentary. So that's what we're taking on tonight. We're not reading a specific chapter in the class. We're basically setting you up for your next project. Now that you have completed your radio commercial, we're talking about the documentary. And I would like to move to assigning that before we go into what a documentary is all about so that you have the details. So first of all, I want to let you know that this assignment is worth 25 points. It's worth 1/4 of your entire grade for the class, not meant to freak you out. It's meant to say that this is a really important project. And the documentary is not going to be due until April the 29th. So you have more than a month to work on this project. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have to be putting together pieces of it from different parts of wherever you are taking your course. And some people in New Jersey, some in Pennsylvania, everybody's connected by the internet. It's not going to be easy, but we can get it done. It's worth 25 points, this documentary. Now back to the requirements for the documentary, all of which is posted on D2L under the content tab. Here's what your assignment is. In your documentary, you are to choose a band or artist, if you want to consider it that way, a musical band. To choose a band, a landmark, for example, the Stroud Mansion in town, the Shawnee Inn, the Water Gap Inn, the Barley Creek Brewery, a landmark, or an event such as the coronavirus, such as the election coming up, such as graduation at ESU, an event, or a situation. A situation would be also similar to a pandemic that we're talking about. It's something that's ongoing right now. It could be the situation of students not having housing. Not having housing could be a situation of students having to complete classes online. You can take on anything you want. This documentary could be very therapeutic for the group. And then what your job is to for one person, the person who's elected as the producer of the documentary, every group must have a producer, a person who's in charge, person who's keeping track of others' responsibilities, a person who's overseeing the entire project, a person who is in some senses delegating responsibility, assigning tasks. You're going to have a producer. That's the way it works in the media world. You're going to have a producer, and that producer is going to pitch their idea to me. You're going to pitch your idea to me. It must be pitched to me by Wednesday of next week. You can pitch your idea either in email or you can pitch it to me in a YouTube video. The email or the YouTube video is going to cover the usual things that you cover in a pitch. It's going to basically describe your media plan and why this documentary that you want to create will have an audience that will be interested in it. So back to this assignment, the documentary is worth 25 points. I'm going to ask you to select your own group members on this assignment. You must have a group of either 4 or 5 people. So that's going to get us to 4 or 5 documentaries for the entire class. 4 to 5 people for this documentary, no more, no less. The documentary is going to be exactly 15 minutes. In the middle of this documentary, you're going to take a 30-second break. You're going to take it at 7 minutes into the documentary. And that 30-second break is going to be a PSA. It must be a public service announcement of no member in the group. You must grab a PSA from somewhere else. I don't mind if you grab it from the web. I'd love you to have one from WESS, but I don't see how that's possible. Now, the overall format of the documentary is it's going to have an intro, a body, and a conclusion. That's how you tell a story. That's what documentaries do. They tell a story. More about that when I talk about the theory of documentary. You must also use music to move your storyline along. You must also use at least 4 sound bites in this documentary. Those 4 sound bites must come from experts or witnesses. Now, choose your documentary very carefully because in the coronavirus situation, it's going to be tough to get quotes from people. It is possible. You can have them email you an MP3 file, but perhaps what you'll be doing is grabbing bits and pieces of people's quotes as they have already been broadcast on media, in interviews, on late night TV shows, etc., from their own websites. Nevertheless, you must use 4 sound bites from experts, quote, or experts/witnesses that are in your documentary. Also, you must use other sound effects, or you can use other sound effects, I should say, not must. You can use other sound effects at the group's discretion. If you want to include other sound effects, other kinds of funny sounds or reality sounds from the field, such as car crashes, airplanes, sirens, things of that nature, you can certainly do that. Now, the grading for this project are going to be as follows. I'm going to be grading you on your articulation. That's how clearly you are speaking. I'm going to be grading you on your interpretation, the kind of meaning that you put into the documentary in your interpretation of the text, the copy. I'm going to be grading you on the completeness of your intro, body, and conclusion. I'll discuss what goes into those parts shortly. I'm going to be grading you on your flow. The flow is the use of verbal and musical transitions to transition from one idea to another. A lot of times in documentaries, the way that they're constructed is they will cover a time period and then move to another time period. You've got to get your audience from being in 2013 to 2016, for example. And so often that's done with a musical or a verbal transition. You must also be paying attention when I grade your production to production qualities. Now, this is where I'm going to have to be lenient because of the circumstances that we're producing these under, but ideally you want to have consistent volume levels. You want the quality of your sounds to be listenable. I need to be able to tell that if you have a fire alarm going off, that is what that is. You also need to have a minimum number of pauses in this production. You can't have the documentary on top of us the whole time. There needs to be pauses in there to let the listeners absorb. This is an audio documentary. And as always, you need to have a media plan and a script. This is what I'm going to be grading your documentary on. Now let's turn to what documentaries are all about. Documentaries, you don't find them too awful much in American media, though they are there. Documentaries tend not to be big money makers. They tend to appeal to people who want to learn something, whereas most people who are driven to media are seeking entertainment and escape, and not necessarily documentaries. However, in many countries across the world, you do find documentaries because the media are provided with funding, and those media are public service media. They're provided with funding from the government, and they produce documentaries. One of the most interesting documentaries I ever saw, you would be very interested in, I'm sure, And that was a documentary done in England by the BBC where it traced two college students who go through college, they meet each other, they get a romantic relationship going, they end up marrying, and then it tracks their student debt and how they handle it on into their early careers. This was a documentary that was recorded across a 5-year time period. That's something only a public service broadcaster with funding, automatic, that's from the government, can do, because they don't have to rely on advertising support to produce that documentary. That's not to say, however, that documentaries do not have their place in our country. You do find documentaries on the Lifetime channel. You can, in essence, argue that we have a ton of crime documentaries. Certainly the Forensic Files is a kind of documentary, even though it's using reenactments. You can find lots of music documentaries in MTV and VH1, and really any of the channels on cable that are considered to be more educationally oriented, like the Lifetime channel or the National Geographic channel. Over on radio, they're not as common, but you do find them on public broadcasters, particularly NPR. So that's the importance of the documentary. The documentary, again, is going to help society understand phenomena that they wouldn't otherwise understand. So what are documentaries now? Let's head into our class discussion here. Documentaries, as I mentioned earlier, are all about telling a story. They're all about telling a story, this 15 minutes that you're going to use, and that story is going to have a beginning, it's going to have a middle, and it's going to have an ending. Really good documentaries tell good stories. You're going to be using narration, which is a person's voice in this group. Everybody in the group must speak at some point in this documentary. You're going to be using narration. That's you, a third person, talking about others, but that's not going to be the entire portion of the documentary. You're also going to be using music. You're going to be using actualities, also known as sound effects. And you're going to be using commentary. That's going to be from the witnesses and the experts that you're going to go out and find sound bites for. You're going to have to learn during this project to work with other people in a very difficult environment. I'm putting that in front of you. I'm going to ask every single person in the group to please, now is not the time to become a slacker and be out of communication with the rest of your group members. Everybody needs to be pulling their weight for this assignment. That's what makes it a team effort. That's what builds up the team project. That's what makes you feel good. So the trick is in selecting a good topic for your group to all get behind. Now let's talk about those 3 parts of a documentary so that we understand what goes into a documentary. We'll talk about the intro first. The intro first is going to start with basically introducing the subject of the documentary. If it's an event, a situation, or a band, you're going to introduce that subject. You're also going to introduce a thesis. A thesis is one statement that you're going to make at the beginning of the documentary which covers the arc of the story. The thesis is that one sentence that says basically what the documentary is all about. If you're doing a documentary on a band called, for example, the White Stripes, very strange band from the 1990s. Nobody even knew who was in the band. It was Jack White, that's the band it was named from. And then he supposedly had a sister who he also might have been married to named Meg White. It was all very mysterious. Great subject for a documentary. What's happened to them? They produced a lot of music that people were listening to. There were only 2 people, a guitarist and a drummer. Let's say that you want to tell that story. So you're going to start with introducing the band, but the thesis is not going to be, this documentary is on the White Stripes. What the thesis is going to be is arguing what the documentary is going to show. And so as a group, you have to decide what that documentary is going to show. In the case of the White Stripes, the thesis may be that this documentary will show that 2 unusual, off-the-chart people were able to come together in a city very unlikely for rock and roll, Detroit, and put together a band who nobody ever really knew. Wouldn't that be an interesting documentary? Listening to music and you can't find out who the band is. At least you can't get a handle on the relations between the characters. So that's what that thesis might be talking about. And then you're going to, as a final act in your intro, you're going to sum up the journey that this band has taken. Or if you're covering an event, let's say you want to do the coronavirus, you're going to handle the journey that it's taken so far. Or if it's a landmark like the Stroud Mansion, do you know where that is? It's on Main Street in Stroudsburg. It's a history museum named after Jacob Stroud, who built it, and also the town of Stroudsburg was founded after. You're going to talk about what that person's journey was like. Rags to riches, from humble immigrant to community leader. Those are the kinds of things that you're going to discuss. The journey is basically going to be covered by the body, which is the next section. But in the intro, you're just going to sum it up so the listeners know what's coming up. Makes it easier for them to listen to. Then they can just kick back because they know where the documentary's headed. They know what the documentary's mainly going to cover. The intro is only going to take about 10% of that 15 minutes. So you're talking about just about a minute or less for your introduction. Next up is the body. The body is going to be the major part of your documentary. It's about 85%. It's definitely the substance of your documentary. And in the documentary's body, you also have a kind of beginning period that you get at. This is the beginning period of how the members of the band met, how the idea for building a Jacob Stroud mansion came up, how the pandemic coronavirus started in China, if you believe that it started in China. So this is the beginning. And you have to establish that time period in your documentary. Then after that, you generally will discuss a period of taking off of the issue. If it's a band, the band suddenly started to become noticed and became famous. If it's the coronavirus, it suddenly moved beyond the Wunan province in China and moved to Italy and then the United States. If it's the Stroud Mansion, how it moved from the idea stage to the construction. You're talking about the beginning, and then you're talking about the taking off, how things really took off. And because things are taking off, you start to have issues. So this is the next phase you go into the body. A good documentary creates conflict and tension. That's what storytelling is all about. Because by creating that conflict and tension, you create interest in the documentary, interest in having that conflict and tension resolved. Oh, the two main people in this band are fighting with each other? What's going to happen? That's what we're talking about. Oasis? What's going to happen? They going to come back together? That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a conflict and tension period that you cover next in your body. You're going to talk about conflicts in musical direction if you're doing a band. You're going to talk about conflicts in policies, in political differences, maybe even in personalities between the people involved, maybe even in spouses. Everything is within range in a documentary. You can cover anything and everything for this class. You're basically trying to get at the squabbles, the conflicts, the tensions, the disagreements, the things that are going wrong. Were drugs and alcohol part of it? Whereas corruption part of it? Was anything else part of it? That's what we want to discuss during this phase. And then that leads nicely, ideally what you want to have is that tension come to a head right before you take your break. You take your break at 7 o'clock, and now people are listening to a commercial, and they want to come back from that commercial to hear how the conflict is resolved. Ideally, if you can structure your documentary this way. Next up then is the resolution of the conflict. Here you talk about how the conflict continued, and then did it break up the band? Did it stop the project? Did it stop people who were interested in the pandemic from continuing their involvement? Or was there resolution of the issue? Was there a coming together of people? Who was it that compromised? What kinds of decisions were made that allowed people to come together instead of continuing the tension and conflict? What kinds of things happen to bring about some more happiness in this issue, this pandemic, this situation, this landmark, this band that you're discussing? And then that will take you to your conclusion. The conclusion is only going to be 5% of the entire documentary. This is just a wrap-up phase. A conclusion is going to restate the thesis that you stated at the outset, reminding the audience what the main idea is about the documentary that you wanted to communicate. You're also, in your conclusion, going to summarize the journey that's going to take. You're going to remind the audience of the beginnings, the tension, the conflict, the growth period. Sorry, got that backwards. The beginnings, the intensive growth period, the conflict tension, and then the resolutions. And then finally, what you're going to end that documentary with is speculating on the future. Now, the only other thing that I want to discuss in this assignment here is the idea of transitions. In your transitions, you'll be using music. Hopefully it will be instrumental music, although you can have some music with words if the words are able to fit in. You can find great examples of that when you look at almost any documentary. And these musical transitions will be only around 5 to 10 seconds long. It will just be telling us that we're moving from one time period to another, or one location to another, or one thought process to another. Those musical transitions are going to fade in, then fade out, and then you go to that next narration or that next witness inclusion inside of your documentary. And then also you're going to have as a transition vocal transitions. These are things that the narrator says. So it's going to be a comment like after the so and so album came out, the band reached new heights. And then you go to the new heights and you're going to allow band members to talk about it. They're going to say, "Oh my God, we started having sellout concerts." You know, or you're going to say, "Once the foundation for the Stroud Mansion was built, then the next phase began, filling it in with artifacts from around Monroe County that are considered to be historical." That is a vocal transition. You're going to have that inside of your documentary. Now, many of you may feel overwhelmed at this assignment. It is a big assignment. It's something that you may not be that familiar with since documentaries are not incredibly pervasive in our culture. And for those, I suggest that you look at documentaries, listen to documentaries. There are tons of them on Netflix, and certainly you can find them online at your own fingertips with a little bit of searching. It is my hope that you will see this project as a great way to divert yourself from the pandemic that's happening and to dig into something that will actually cleanse the way that you're feeling and thinking, and ultimately provide some knowledge that we will air on WESS, and we will air these documentaries on WESS radio, the ones that are deemed appropriate to produce. If they are, I don't know. We're doing this mostly online. We'll see. But that opportunity is there for you to make an actual difference with your documentary. And so with that, it's up to you if you want to ask me any questions. I'm going to await next to the organization of groups. There will be a D2L link where you can tell me who the groups are in this documentary. And next, I'm going to be waiting for your pitches. Good luck for that. And I look forward to listening to your commercials and grading those and providing those feedback on those. Wish things could be different, but at least we're all still together. Good luck to you. Have a great day.